Good. Right, let's try that. We've dropped out of the mobile tethering, so let's try that, and hopefully, is that better?
Loads.
Good. Right. Okay, here we go. So that's me, and name of my company. As you can see, I've got my award-winning there, and this is a brief introduction to adult health and social care in England. Like Steve, I'm not going to tell you how I do things because you don't want to know really. I'm going to try and just tell you the sorts of things that I do to support my families. So this is what I try to achieve, enabling families to balance demanding careers, family life and me time with supporting older loved ones who have increasing care needs. And the reason I do this is because my mum, my sister and I were that family. So my sister and I in our 50s, working full time, although I was freelance, so I could juggle a bit. My dad had died in 2000. My mum was now mid to late 70s, absolutely classic. They're generally living longer and healthier. But we collect chronic illnesses, which we don't drop in our 50s, 60s, 70s so much nowadays with heart attacks and strokes, because they're very well managed. We've also had several generations now since the Second World War of better housing, better nutrition, better air, better water, and specifically better medical care. So generally we carry on. But what can happen later on is that you get a knock-on effect. So something goes a bit off kilter, and then you find you're going through the more GP appointments, more medications and tests, then maybe more consultants, then maybe a dreaded A&E, and through an accident or an infection or whatever, and things start to snowball, and suddenly you realise mum and dad aren't coping as well as they did. What do we do now, and how do we juggle doing that when we may not have young children, but we may have dependent children still? Women now don't retire till the same age as men. None of us retire till our late 60s. We can't afford to lose a salary. You have more complex family makeups with divorces and remarriages, or recoupling in various forms, whatever they may be, and things can get awfully complicated. And how do you sort this out? So I just want to share this one, because what I'm going to show now is potentially these are the people who are now in the sort of age range that I'm talking about, because I just support people over retirement age, or families and their loved ones who are over retirement age and with increasing care needs. But find it and play it. This is what they were singing about.
Jo, there isn't any sound on this. Is there meant to be sound playing?
Okay, so the thing is, of course, most of them haven't died before they get old, and probably are glad of the fact on the whole. So we have a very much an aging population, mostly aging healthier, but as I say, some will need care, but don't panic about that. Only about 13% of people 75 and over, so in that age group, in care homes. So most people stay at home and are cared for at home. So the first bit I'm going to do is a quick whip through my why, because one of the things I struggle with sometimes is people look at old people and just see an old person. But that old person has had a life with all sorts of ups and downs in that life we probably know nothing about. There may be reasons why they're sad or grumpy or whatever. And it may not just be that currently they have debilitating illnesses which make, frankly, any of us sad and grumpy. So here's my why. In my family, you will all have your own family stories, and if you don't know them, go and find out before it's too late. So this is my maternal grandfather. He was born in 1897. when he was at university and the First World War started, he dropped out of his university place, much to his parents' horrified reaction, and he joined the Royal Flying Corps, and that's the sort of plane that he flew. He was an engineer. That was what he was studying at a London university. And after the First World War, he built cars. These are cars that are used for uphill. So not racing on flat, but going uphill. And they were also road cars as well. They were called the Beckenham Specials. So that's where they were based. And some of them still exist, which is amazing. He then, after the war, having been in the Admiralty during the war in London, after the war, because all engineering firms were requisitioned by the state during the Second World War, he left, came up here to join the burgeoning car factories in Coventry and to design cars. That's his wife, my gran, Patience Batten. You can't see in that picture, but she was auburn-haired and green-eyed and considered a great beauty. She worked at the Admiralty Arch for the government. She and my grandfather, they were swingers of their time. They were flappers. They went to all the best places, etc., in London, and had a really fab time. But she worked as well, as I say, there. And this is their daughter, Wendy, my mum. Now, sadly for my grandparents, 2 years earlier, they'd had a little girl called Mary, who was born with severe spina bifida, so the spinal cord was open. Back then, there was nothing they could do. She had her at home, as was normal, and they just said, give her water until she dies. And she died when she was about 5 days old. I cannot imagine as a mother what that must have been like to go through, just waiting for your baby to die with no support, basically. And it was never talked about afterwards because she didn't talk about these things. That was the ethos of the day. Anyway, 2 years later, they had my mum, Wendy, who's pictured here as a little girl on the left, in Venice on her honeymoon in the middle, and she worked at John Lewis in Leicester in a management role there. She'd always stated she wanted to marry a farmer, so frankly, my father never stood a chance, really. Here's my paternal grandfather, Wilfred. He didn't live long, as you can see, died at 29. The pictures might give you a clue of what he died from. That's him, his betrothal photograph, just before the Second World War, and that was also, he just before that taken on the farm, which is the thatched building in the middle with the door with the porch over it. And that was where my father was born and lived until he retired at 72, and that's where I lived, my sister, my mum. So we farmed Bloom Hills Farm from around about 1112 until the 1990s. And then, as I say, sadly, in 1918, he went to Leicester with a friend on the train. There was a returning from the front soldier who was clearly unwell. His friend didn't catch anything. Grandpa caught the Spanish flu, as it was called at the time, and died not long after. What was going on in that farmhouse? My granny was ill, nursing her husband. Her sister was there, who was very ill, being nursed by a nurse. Her daughter was there, who also had the flu, and my father had actually gone to his grandparents in Leicester, but he also had the flu. When Grandpa died, sister went through and survived. Granny was so ill, they had to tell her again later that her husband had died and the funeral had happened. He was actually the only person in Dunbassett to die of Spanish flu, but as you know, not the only person throughout the world. Here's the betrothal picture of Grace, his wife. Now, Grace, when he died in 1918, her daughter had been born in 1916. My dad was born in 1918. So he was only 8 months old when his dad died, and his sister was just over 2. So Granny was left with a farm. Tenant farmers didn't own the land, 2 young children. Now, a lot of men had died during the First World War. Grandpa didn't go to fight on the front. He tossed up with his brother, because farmers were what we call reserved occupations, and they were in the Second World War. Tossed up with his brother to see who would stay at home and look after his farm and his brother's farm, and who would go to the front. Whichever you like to say, Wilfred won, whatever, looked after the two farms. His brother came back and survived and lived to a ripe old age. Sadly, Wilfred, as I said, died in 1918 in the Great Flu epidemic. So Granny was left with a farm. Now, because of what had happened with the flu epidemic and the war, there was a huge shortage of men. Huge shortage, which is why you ended up with a lot of ladies that never married. They lost fiancés, but there was a huge dearth of marriageable men. The landlord, knowing that Granny came from farming stock as well as her husband, for going back many generations, and that Granny was a good farmer, offered her the tenancy. Now, bear in mind, she couldn't even vote because the vote wasn't in for women at that stage, but she was offered to manage the tenancy of the farm, which she did until she retired the year my mum and dad got married in 1956. Right, so here's my dad with his sister on the left. In the middle, during the Second World War, he was in the Home Guard because the only role he could have taken was Air Force. That was all they would let reserve people in. And he tried 3 times, he wasn't good enough for the maths. But in the Home Guard, you may or may not be aware of, they train certain people to become equivalent to SAS trained. So they would be behind the lines if we were invaded, and my father was trained to that level, but it was completely hush-hush, and nobody knew even that these people existed because they never talked about it because they'd signed the Official Secrets Act. Many never in their lifetime, and some did sort of 30 odd years later. And then my dad was very keen on motorbikes. He was very good. He was the rider, very good sidecar, grass track sidecar rider. Won many competitions and that sort of thing, but gave up once he got 2 young children because he said it wasn't fair the time it took to do all that. And he won a medal in the Teachers as well. And there's my mum and dad on their wedding day, and that's the family, best man. So here's one to make you laugh. That's me at the bottom there. So I wasn't looking snobby. Apparently, I couldn't take my eyes off the cup. It was so shiny in the sunshine, and I blinked just the wrong moment. But that's me at about probably three-ish, I would say, looking at my sister there, Louise. Right, I'm just going to now, I've done all that bit. I have long boy. Right, but that's why I do what I do. Because I know that those are people I'm looking at had a life. They're not just the old person we see now. They've loved, lost, lived, etc. And one of the things I talk about a lot with people is planning. Start talking to your loved ones now. Start making sure they've got wills and lasting powers of attorney in place. Know what they want, understand them, know what they might want when they get older and what the possibilities are, because it really is important. There was a couple of years ago, there was a bank doing talk about the M word, which was money, and how people would rather talk about sex than money. I think we really, really need to be talking about the K and the C word, because your loved ones, and I know some of you will have lost them earlier, but basically most of us are living to the ripe old age. And they're saying now that young children born now have a very high likelihood to live to be at least 100. So there are 5 basic care rights that everyone's entitled to. And this is hugely important. It actually comes from the Human Rights Act, basically. And I have used the Human Rights Act with hospitals and care providers sometimes when they've really been sticky about doing what they really should be doing, and they've had a stiff email. It gets results. It's an interesting response when you start quoting the Human Rights Act to these hospital directors, actually. To be respected involves supported and told what's happening at every stage. And that has to be the case. Even if you think someone's got dementia or doesn't understand, you've still got to involve them as absolutely the best you can. The Mental Health Act makes that absolutely legally clear. That the care, treatment and support, it's their needs, not a generic need, not we think this is what they need. It's all now about person-centred care. So that person's needs, and if they have a carer, the carer must be included as well. That they have the right to be safe, but that has to be proportional. You can't just lock people up because that makes them safe. It has to be proportional. You have to look at what is the bare minimum that you need to do, the least oppressive options in terms that are used, to make sure that the person is safe, but not locked in a room and never allowed to do anything. You do come across that where you go to care homes where all the doors are locked. Nobody can get in or out. Actually, that's not legal. It all should be done on risk assessment. That the staff have the right skills to do their jobs properly. I mean, there's been a huge amount in the news recently about care staff who are paid the bare minimum, expected to do a massive job of caring for our elderly loved ones and at other ages, of course, but this is the area I specialise in, on minimum wage and very little training. And that's why you end up with such a huge turnover of staff. You know, we pay these people less than they get paid to stack shelves at Asda's, and then we expect them to care for people who are precious to us. It's a good talking point there. And that the care provider routinely checks the quality of services. You know, it shouldn't be just, we look at this when the CQC is about to come down on us on a ton of bricks, that's the Care Quality Commission. There should be proper management in place that this is being done on a regular basis, and everybody knows what's going on, and that they're checking that it's not only quality overall, but quality for each client. Very quickly, Sue will recognise some of these. How caring can affect people at home and work. Well, that's how people come to me very often. So it can make you distracted and not focused. You're always nipping out for phone calls, taking time off at short notice, you're taking sick leave due to stress, and you're considering resigning due to stress. Hundreds of people every week resign from their jobs because they're not getting the support and they just can't manage any longer. And they resign. Some of them do try and take unfair dismissal cases, but there haven't been many yet. We've made sure that parents can care for children at the start, but we've not thought about how are they going to care for their elderly loved ones. And these are often your well-experienced key employees. Really don't want to lose them if you can find a workaround or have someone like me that can help to support them. So this is what happens to you when you realise that a loved one needs more care and support than you can offer. You start to feel guilty that you can't do it all, so you kill yourself trying to do it all. You become anxious and upset. It's hugely emotional. And this is why I talk about planning. A lot of people, most of the people are already at crisis point because they haven't thought about it in advance. You may worry about the financial implications. Now I'm going to suggest something here. And this isn't me originally thinking, but it is what was said to me by someone else who's similar to what I do and said this. If you're going to pay £5 grand for a holiday or 30 grand for a car or whatever, you will probably check it out, take insurance, look on websites to see what the reviews are, test it, blah, 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 and whatever. I get people coming to me who have signed up to documents that for 55,000 years, £55,000 for maybe the next 3 or 4 years, for a loved one to be getting care, wherever that may be, without ever discussing it with anybody. They don't talk to an independent financial advisor about whether this can be afforded. They just knee-jerk. And then, and the other thing is they then find they've signed up that if mum or dad or auntie Flo run out of money, that they will take on the fees. So you wouldn't do that for anything else. Why do we do it with care for loved ones? That's something to think of. You may have no idea where to turn to help and advice. Well, hopefully, as you've got to know me and from this, you will. The other thing that regularly happens, it happened to my sister. We nearly came to a punch up over my mother's hospital bed on one occasion, and there are times on other occasions when we just had to walk away from each other. Because much as we loved my mother, and much as under normal circumstances we get on really well, your emotions are so high. And for some people, they're going to have to start dealing with family that they may not be getting on too well with in the first place. So this is an emotionally difficult time, and then all this family angst comes flooding back in. And trust me, there's a lot of reversion to, well, you locked me in the cupboard when I was 6 and I've never forgiven you. So, you know, that's why I talk about having conversations. And here's just a list, I'm not reading it out, of the other people that may get involved. So if we just go back through that again, where are you going to find the time to deal with all that? How will you know if you've been dealt with fairly? How will you know if you need to challenge the health service or adult social care on the funding? All that sort of thing. How are you going to find time, say with attendance allowance, to find 4 to 5 hours to gather all the information together and get that allowance submitted? Trust me, I get people asking me to do it, saying it's sat on my kitchen table for a year and I haven't got around to it. I can support in all those areas. And this is what you'll need to do to find care. This is whilst you're having a life, juggling a job and family, etc., etc. Trust me, you won't have a life. And the reason I retrained is because this was what my family went through and I wasn't happy. How does adult health and social care join up in this country? Very badly. People don't really know what's happening on the other side. And if you're a self-funder, so the person, it has over £23,250 in assets and has maybe a good income through pensions, the state will go, you're a self-funder, go and sort it out yourself. Because they're overrun with people who aren't self-funders and they're trying to do all this themselves. So they don't want to know really. You're left to your own devices, and that was our problem. That's why I retrained and then realised I think it's a business model. So let me just check where I am, because as always. So this is what, and this is through Cherie and Circle Club and Concannon Group. I was challenged because I haven't really to put together my vision, which is this: that families trying to balance demanding careers, family life and me time with supporting self-funding elderly relatives who have increasing care needs have easy access to the information and advice they need, because you don't. I can tell you that, trust me, that's why I did a load of training, because I needed to understand it. My background in local government was quasi-legal. I studied law at university. I enforced law in local government. I understand how to read acts, regulations, guidance, you know, what's enforceable, what isn't enforceable, blah, blah, blah. So not like not understanding, I threw myself into starting reading the Care Act and all the other acts that involved. This is my mission: to ensure families who have self-funding elderly relatives get the same support as those who are funded by social services and the NHS. Families' loved ones to continue to have a good quality of life, and for them all to be able to continue to spend time together that's enjoyable, memorable, and free of stress. A lot of families become carers, and you stop having stressed out and trying to do all this, and you stop having family relationships. You're not children with parents, you become carers, and that can be really difficult, really stressful. I'm not suggesting you don't do it, and most people want to do some of it, but sometimes you just have to go, I can't do all of this, I need support, because if you go under, you know, as the saying goes, you can't pour from an empty jug. And these are my values. listen to you and support you. I will provide independent information and advice and not accept any offers that might compromise that independence. My families pay me. There are people who do what I do, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with this, but they get commission. So if you take up a bed in their care home, or you take up their domiciliary support, or you go to that particular person to do your wills and lasting powers of attorney or whatever else like that, they will get a commission. I decided right from the start I'm independent. If I suggest somewhere, it's because of you. If I recommend someone, it's because I think they will fit in your family. And very often I'll recommend a company so you can make your own decision. So you pay me, and you know that I'm completely independent if I'm suggesting that you talk to this person or look at that or have this company come in. And I will definitely ensure that your rights, wishes and views are respected. In other words, I will make sure that you are being listened to, you and your loved one are being listened to. I'm blunt. I can be blunt, as I'm sure you've all decided by now, knowing me. I'm compassionate, but I tell it like it is. I won't lead you up the garden path that some things could happen when I know absolutely they're not going to. And whatever you might want, it's really not possible. So I will be completely clear and open and honest with everything that I talked to you about. And but equally, I will check that if you're being told things or things are happening, if I know they're not right, I will say that to you. And I think that's my last slide. And then we won't doubt you or your desired outcome. Won't doubt it. I won't try and influence you, but I will be honest about what your possibilities are, and then you make that decision as a family. I won't try and persuade you to do what others want you to do if I believe that that's not in the person's best interests, or that there are other ways of doing that. I have with that a family where, I'm conscious of the time, I'm nearly about on a half hour. I had that with a family where, because gentleman living, and in fact Amelia cared for this gentleman for several years at home afterwards, because he'd wandered a couple of times with dementia, lived by himself. He had someone come in for 1 hour a day. He'd got lost a couple of times wandering out, but he lived in his home 40 odd years, brought his family up there, knew his neighbours, they knew him. He still liked to go down to the pub and have a pint and a meal a couple of times a week. Because he got lost a couple of times when he was out and about, he got on the wrong bus coming out of Loughborough, and one other thing, adult social care turned around and said, you've got to get him in a residential care home within a fortnight, or we're going to section him. Unfortunately, they knew someone who knew me. It was entirely out of proportion. Absolutely entirely out of proportion. Talked to the family, represented them at the best interest meeting for him and themselves, and we arranged a compromise, and eventually needed living care, but not for the first year. But he had another over 3 years at home before he did finally have to come into residential care, and he was very happy that, being able to stay with a family. So that's me. If you want to contact me, but I know you've got my contact details anyway. So I think now what I do is stop sharing my screen. Somebody's still there, that's fab. And I'm happy to take any questions basically that you might have. I don't know if there's any in the chat or whatever. I don't know, Rosie, if you can see if there's any in the chat. Can you hear me all?
Yes, absolutely. Joanne, that was really, really, really interesting. Really interesting. I know that technically I'm probably not a member and not, I feel like I get to come to all of these things and get all of this amazing information, but this particular topic and what you do does obviously resonate with everybody, but especially me, because I'm at the age now where my grandparents are, some of them are struggling, and it is, obviously we're all sat in a family and you're trying to decide what to do. And for about 5 years, we had absolutely no idea. Like you just don't know what is the right thing to do or where to go for it.
I use the phrase, you don't know what you don't know.
No. No, but I just feel like there isn't really a lot of help. And this is why this is so good and so interesting. And it's something that we'll now all be able to take with us and at least be slightly more equipped, you know, than we would be. And the fact that there's you as well to come to is great, because honestly, you are just left to your own devices. But no, it was really, really good. I haven't seen any questions in the chat box come through, but I don't know if anybody wants to say anything. Sue and Liz.
Now, Jo, I've known you for a long time, and I think what you do is absolutely brilliant. What would you say has been your biggest learning point in talking with families, you know, like any of us? What have you learnt about how people react to the situation that they find themselves in?
That I haven't fully realised how much as a family. I grew up in a family where you've seen my immediate family. I grew up in a family as well where certainly with my parents and whatever, you don't just take from life, you give. So I can't remember ever not manning a stall at a charity event or whatever, and doing things like that. And my parents were active members in the community, as well as having the farm. And it was all about, you don't just sit there and expect things to happen. But also, in a funny way, I hadn't fully realised, we have always, you know, openly talked about what's going to happen when we get old. Now, I think part of that was because being farming, being fairly close by, we were with our older relatives. You know, my grandparents, one lived in Lutterworth, one lived at Glen Hills, so regularly stayed with them, regularly saw them. Interesting thing for me that my grandfather Wilfred, so Warren, died in that farmhouse, and 60 years later my grandfather Battle died in that farmhouse, because he was a widow by then and he got dementia in the last few years of his life, and in the end he moved into the farmhouse with us. Now we're lucky, we have space, but you know, I'd never really thought about it that way until recently. But I suppose because of that, we talked about these things. We knew what people wanted and what their lives were and the sort of things they liked and disliked. And it's one of the things I really say, it's talk. And most families aren't talking about this. They don't want to. I mean, I do have a bit of a talk about that as well, about how to introduce conversations. But if you're not talking, you have no idea. You know, does your mum or dad or Auntie Flo expect that if they have care needs, that you're going to stop everything and look after them? Is that the expectation? And is it? If it is, can you do that? Do you want to do that? Do you want to do some? You know, what savings are happening? You know, what's in place if you have to fund care? Has that been thought about? You know, you need to be talking to Lindsay about estate planning and will writing and lasting powers of attorney. And lasting powers of attorney aren't just for old people. Chris and I have had them for years, each other and our children each side, because we're in a second marriage each and we don't have any shared children, are then our deputy attorneys, if you like. But as I've said before, I know someone here in Market Harborough, she and her husband ran a business, been together 20 odd years, teenage children. He walked into the office, he was very fit, walked into the office. I mean, some of you may, David, you may have known him. It's a marketing company in Market Harborough, very fit, walked into the office at 49 and had a massive heart attack and hit the deck. Now, he was a runner, a swimmer, a blah, 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 looking at you, David, hit the deck. Now, they dialed 999. The paramedics brought him back. Now, he had not been breathing for some time, and that was possibly not a good thing. He was a completely brain dead. Basically, he was in a complete vegetative state. What his wife discovered, having no lasting powers of attorney for health and welfare or finance property, was All joint bank accounts were instantly frozen. The business accounts, which were in their joint names, were instantly frozen. Because they had no lasting, she had no lasting powers of attorney, when he was taken into hospital, basically they said he's going to have to go into nursing care. He got funding by the state because of his position, but to make any decisions for him, as she said, here we were, we've been together 20 odd years, we ran a business together, we had teenagers together. I had to go through the court of protection to be able to be allowed to make decisions about the health, welfare and finances of our business and my husband. And you have to prove then to the court of protection that you're the best person to do it. And they might not agree you're the best person to do it. So they might give it to a panel of complete strangers. And then once you're through the court of protection, if you do get it, every year you have to submit, so she had to, with help of an accountant, and every year had to submit accounts to the court of protection, which if you've got lasting powers of attorney, you don't have to do. Lasting powers of attorney, you can do them online or get Lindsay to do them, 250 quid each, but they'll be done properly. Court of protection, £1,500 starting point, all the onerous stuff year in, year out, all the prying into your lives of you and your loved one, and it takes 6 months to get at the moment. So get your lasting powers of attorney in place, because any of us could contract an illness like coronavirus and go into a coma. We have temporary loss of capacity. So if you've got no lasting power of attorney, it's the state, NHS, and that are making decisions about you, basically. And they'll let you go along with the family. They'll go along with the family as long as they agree. But I have had positions where, because there were no LPAs, that people have come to me and said, now we've disagreed, and this was an adult social care disagreement. We haven't got lasting power of attorney in place. So adult social care, who for the last few years have been talking to us quite happily about our dad's care and what he needs and everything else, because we've now challenged and said, we're not happy with what they're suggesting, have now said, you don't have lasting powers of attorney, we're not going to talk to you. And they wouldn't. They'd been talking to them, emailing them, whatever, and they just shut the family out because they now didn't disagree with what adult social care was doing. I mean, Lisa knows all this too, don't you, Lisa? And can give you similar sorts of stories. And I know Lisa actually, because some people don't have family, and people like Lisa will actually act as their attorneys, or they'll be on the court of protection panel looking after those people who don't have family or didn't have anything in place, etc. So it's talk, start talking, also look at yourselves. You know, David, you could come off your bike, hit your head. It could be permanent damage and you've lost capacity. What's going to happen with your business? What's going to happen with your personal accounts and your personal life? Who's going to make decisions? They have them in place. You know, and then, or it could just be that you're in a coma for a few weeks and you're back out again. But what was happening during that time? Who were making decisions? So it's something you need to be talking about with your current loved ones, with your elderly loved ones. Just have some ideas in place of what you think you want. The other thing I talk about is, you know, the house that we move, the statistics show the house we move into in our late 40s, very often the house that we stay the longest in. Because before that, we've generally been trying to up on the housing market, get bigger and better houses, we earn more money, or we have more income, whatever. Or particularly now, you get a lot of people going into a big house because when their loved ones died and houses have gone up so much in proper value, they get a big lump sum inheritance and they go somewhere bigger because they can. But the point is, late 40s, early 50s, you're probably still very fit and healthy, but have you actually looked at that house to think about another 20 or 30 years' time, whether you'll still be able to live in it? You know, can you convert it? Or has it got lots of stairs, no downstairs bathroom, you know, none of that space or anything else? What I find a lot of people as well is, because when you talk about these things, you've got elderly loved ones. Yeah, my first house was a bungalow as well when I was in my 20s. But you've got elderly loved ones living in houses that actually they're not going to be able to stay in. So have you talked about and looked at, can we convert things in this house and move things around and put in a wet shower room on the ground floor, or get a stair lift up, or do all these things. It should actually, because as we all know, moving is hugely stressful. It's not something you want to do when you're unwell in your 70s, 80s or 90s. Should you be talking about it's time to perhaps think about moving somewhere else to give you time to settle in, and that will mean you can age in place. Because if you can age in place, the chances, there's a meeting on telling, the chances then of having to go into residential care can be much lower because you're okay where you are and care can come in.
That's great. Have you found any particular challenges with people who are on their second marriage, their third marriage, they've got children from one relationship or another? We don't have the same sort of nuclear families like we used to have previously, when it was very clear who was sort of next in line, if you like. Has that proved to be a challenge to you?
It's an interesting one. I mean, you and I, Sue, have done some mediation, haven't we? With that
We
family?
certainly have, yes.
How many were? There had been 5 siblings, one had died, there was now 4, all had lasting powers of attorney, all had to act jointly, basically, and could not agree on anything. And it's one of the most toxic meetings I've ever sat in my life.
We had to have a very stiff drink afterwards, I have to say.
God, well, we both did. We went across the road and had a large gin. It was awful because and these were siblings, and they'd all got lasting power of attorney, and basically they had completely forgotten that when you sign up to LPA, you're signing up about the best interest of the person that is. And they didn't give a toss about. Well, one of them did, the rest didn't give a toss about that. All they were worried about was their inheritance. So they wanted the daughter, who basically in her 50s had given up her job and her life to look after dad, while the others lived in different parts of the country and in France, retired. They wanted her to carry on giving up her life and caring for dad, because they didn't want him to go into residential care, because they didn't want to lose their inheritance. They were all a bit of wasters, really, and money spenders, and they were all struggling to some extent, and all they got their eye on was their inheritance.
Yeah.
And dad was being a successful businessman, and they worried if he went into residential care, they could see their inheritance diminishing before their eyes. A current decent care home, really, one you might want to be in, I'll go for the average. And this is round here now. I'm not talking London or Manchester or whatever, £1,000 a week. Okay, so it's a lot of money. And that's all they could see, was that dad was going to be spending 52 grand a year at least. And if you go into more heavy nursing care and whatever in the private sector, £1,300 a week easily. Adult social care will pay in this area about, if you're not self-funding, and I haven't gone into all these. I mean, I can do more specific on these areas, but it's like Steve said, it's what I can tell you about. But if you're not self-funding, so adult social care are going to pay for your care, if they think you need to go into residential care, most they're likely to pay around here about £600. Some of the care homes they use 450, 500 a week. I would put my dog one of those, frankly. So people who say I'm going to spend all my money and then rely on the state, I just go, good luck. Hope you do die before you don't need too much care. Frankly, it will be pretty appalling. If they're paying for you to have care come into your home, it'll be a lot of 15-minute visits with companies that are doing loads of local authority work. So they don't pay their staff. They pay the company absolute bare minimum. It's quite nice. It's quite nice actually. I mean, most of us aren't aware of this, but if adult social care are going to be looking after your elderly loved one because there's no funding, they don't have it. They do a care needs assessment. They assess how much care they're going to need a week and what that amount is. And then it goes onto a portal that all counties have. And basically, the registered carers that they've got on their list bid for your mum or dad or auntie Flo and say, yeah, we'll take that one on. The lowest bid will get your mum or dad or auntie Flo, okay, through that portal. And those are low, those, because the payment is so low, the businesses that do that tend to pay their staff very low wages, don't pay them travelling time. They'll be doing a lot of 15-minute visits. Well, you can't do 15 minutes. Change someone's nappy, shove them back in the chair and say, someone will come around at 12 o'clock. You know, and that's the way it goes. Independent care companies that don't do any or much adult social care will tend to pay their staff better. They'll pay for travelling, they train them better, and they don't have such a, understandably, such a high turnover of staff. You know, some of the bigger care companies, you'll get elderly people saying in a month they've had 30 different carers in. You don't build relationships. If you pay more per hour, if you're doing it yourself, they will try and stick with the same few carers that come in. So you get to know them and they get to know you. And then you've got Amelia who only does block hours or whatever, and we'll put a small team together. So it may be 3 or 4, and that's all you will see, because they will cover sick leave and illness and holidays as well. And actually, I was talking to Amelia the other day, difference now between her charges, having someone, if you can manage it, have them come in and let one of her people come in and live. And I know your mum experienced this too, because Amelia put some people, if your mum, after she came out of hospital. The difference now between having Amelia coming in and doing 24/7 or someone going into a residential care home, practically no difference in the costs now. So if you've got space, and a lot of people don't realise that could happen, if you've got a spare bedroom and Wi-Fi and all that sort of thing, it may be just as cheap to have someone come and live in, like a housekeeper. So, you know, there's all sorts of options now that people can look at. And these are the things I talk through when I talk to people. You know, I do funding application forms. I talk through people what their options are. I have what I call my 1 hour, £99 brain dump, which is all about adult health and social care. And the thing is, sort of saying, you don't know what you don't know. Because you don't know what questions to ask. People don't volunteer information. And it's really disjointed between healthcare and social care, and people fall through the cracks, even those dependent on that, who are not self-funded, fall through the cracks. And we were 3 intelligent women, my mother, my sister and I, several degrees between us, run businesses. My mother wasn't a farmer's wife, she was a farmer, and she ran all the accounts and did all the buying and selling of the cattle and everything else, worked in the markets. You know, my dad hated the market side of it, doing the buying and selling, so within months my mum did that. So they worked as a partnership. So here we were, 3 intelligent women, and we could not understand how systems worked. And I thought, this is bonkers. I don't like being in this position, which is, as I say, I then trained to become an independent advocate, paid for it myself to do it. When I turned up at the training, it was like, well, which organisation do you belong to? And I said, I don't. I'm a member of the public, and I'm not happy with what I'm seeing, and I want to know how I can challenge what should be happening. So that's why I did what I did, and that's why I do what I do.
Amazing. Well, I feel a little bit bad because I know that we've lost Liz. I think she.
No, that's fine. It's 10 o'clock, and if people have got questions either now or, you know, want to speak to me, you know, I haven't gone into all the details. As I say, I mean, I've got that list there.
Yeah.
But it's more a case of what I say to people: if you think either you've got a client or your family might be in some sort of position of needing support, 20-minute first phone call fact finding is always free. A bit longer if necessary. You know, I'm not counting the minutes. And then you can decide whether you want me to support or not. I don't ask anyone to make decisions at the time. I do charge for my services on my website. As I say, it starts from £99 for a 1 hour Zoom call with however many family you want, which I record, so you've then got it to listen to afterwards. Because you won't remember half of what I've said. You probably won't remember a third of what I've said, but you can go back over it rather than trying to scribble notes. You've got it all there. You can share it, as I did with one family that then shared it with a sister in America who wasn't able to make a call. So she could hear exactly what was said, nothing was hidden. You know, she knew exactly what the conversations were and what was agreed. And some people, that's all they want. Other people, I do attendance allowance application form, that's the set price of £275. But equally, I do hourly rates, packages and things like that. So it just depends what people need. But I think one of my big wins, which you may have heard me say before, but 2 years ago, the family was referred to me because they were in dispute with Nottinghamshire Adult Social Care about paying for mum's care. It took me 3 hours. Yeah, I charged them, I think I charged them about 250 quid, 75 quid. And successfully challenged, because I knew adult social care went wrong, but they kept telling me I was wrong and they kept telling them I was wrong. Eventually put it out to an external solicitors in Nottingham to prove I was wrong, who initially told me I was wrong. And then I said, I can't believe you're saying that if you've had all the information that I've seen. Oh, okay. I said, I'll send it over. In fact, I didn't need to because she went back to adult social care. We had a conversation in the morning. I had a message from her 8 hours later to say, you know, I've just got all the information. You're absolutely right. I've advised adult social care that they can't pursue this money. I saved that family £92,000 for about £300 worth of work. You know.
I mean, that is some money well spent there for them.
Yeah, they were quite pleased with that return. But what tickled me even more, that was so cross with adult social care, because adult social care, this went on for about 2.5 months because they wouldn't respond to things, and we had to keep chasing them to get answers. So it went on for about 2.5 months. They were so cross with adult social care that they said, we shouldn't have needed to spend this money because the solicitors showed that you had all the information and you were wrong, but you kept batting it back to us and saying that right, and we needed to cash in all this money out of mum's investment bond, which if I say to Lisa, investment bond with elements of life assurance, she will know it's an immediate disregard. Not that Nottinghamshire Adult Social Care or the legal team at Nottingham could see that. Saying you've got to cash it in to pay for mum's care before we pay for any care. And they were so cross that they said, right, it cost us 300 quid. Joanne's fees, we want that back. And they paid it.
Wow. What I'll do, Joanne, because I think the only reason I mentioned Liz is I think she had a question. So I'll tell her to email that to you.
Okay.
Please try and ignore the puppy in the background.
No,
James, I know that Lisa and James have popped a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to.
Just trying to find, how do you siblings disagree about what is best for their elderly parents? That was from Lisa. I've just said, Lisa, I think, that Sue and I ended up doing some mediation, which was toxic. What we did in the end, because in the end I said towards the end of the meeting, that in my professional opinion, they had got to the point where they were not acting in the best interests of their father, and that they were putting their father at risk, and that this was becoming a safeguarding matter. And therefore, I now felt that if they couldn't reach some sort of agreement, having gone round and round in circles, that as a professional, I would have to report them to the Office of the Public Guardian, because I didn't believe they were acting as they should have been doing as deputies. And also I would report them to adult social care, because Dad was clearly seriously at risk of becoming injured. He was living in a old house with steep stairs, nothing being done in the house to support him really. I mean, the daughter was doing what she could, but that was mostly sort of cooking and cleaning, but he was alone by himself for most of the day with severe, by now quite severe dementia. And he was wandering and he was falling and all that sort of thing. And basically, that's what I did. So you'll back me up on that, didn't I? That's what effectively I said in the end. And that did sort of focus the minds a bit on coming to some sort of conclusion.
Yeah.
But it isn't easy. It depends. You have to know who's got, as you know, if there are any lasting powers of attorney, and who holds what, and if they're jointly or severally, and that sort of thing. But sometimes I have done, like we did in that meeting, but I've done it on other things as well, and said, look, if you carry on like this, you're going to get nowhere, absolutely nowhere, and you're going to have a crisis, and then adult social care are going to be involved, and then this is going to be completely taken out of your hands, because they will come in, they will look at it as a safeguarding issue, you don't have lasting powers of attorney, and they will just take over. So sometimes I think it's that focusing mind, sometimes I don't know, there's a lot you can do. But I also
cracking heads would be a good way of putting
well,
it.
cracking heads would be great, wouldn't it? But we're not allowed to do that. I think the other thing is that this also, and I know some families just won't talk about it, but if things have been discussed or written down or whatever else, I mean, you can have, you know, directions, wishes, and whatever. If those things are there, then at least if authorities in one way or another do get involved, there is something there to support it. But I agree with you, it's a really difficult one. It really is.
Joanne,
but I go down the best interests of the person and say, if it's the only one that's got that serious was that one that Sue and I were both involved with, where I just said in the end, best interests, Office of the Public Guardian, adult social care safeguarding, not mucking about with this any longer.
Joanne, can I just ask, who is it that is like has the final decision on things like this? You know, like if somebody doesn't want to go into care, but they have to, is there one, you know, we mentioned all the people that might get involved on one of your slides. Who is the big top dog in a sense?
So that's an interesting one, because again, it's a bit like, and Lisa might want to comment on this. If it's in the hospitals, I mean, there was an interesting article about, radio article about DNRs this week that I was, this is starting, I need to go back to. But they were saying a leading legal expert on the do not resuscitate, do not DNAR, do not attempt resuscitation, which they will get. Sometimes people have signed to say, no, if something happens, I don't want to be brought back. You know, I don't want to be messed about. My mum had a DNAR because, frankly, she was so ill, she didn't want to come back, and you couldn't have done it on her anyway because she was so frail. You caused her serious pain and damage. But of course, we discovered people have had them written up on their notes without any consultation, which is not a good idea. I'm not sure it's technically legal from what she's saying, but she said the other thing that isn't made clear is that DNARs, although they might consult with family and you sign it and whatever else, or the loved one does, actually the final decision is a medical decision. So even if you've got a DNAR, your medics in hospital can override that.
Yeah, I think Joe's right. In terms of top of the pyramid, if that's what you're going for, the pyramid in each organisation, so it would start, your starting point would be, does this person have capacity? If the answer to that is yes, well then they make their own decision. That's the end of that pyramid. If the starting point is no, or it's questionable, then the pyramid goes up a level and it's, well, is there an attorney? If the answer is yes, they make the decision. If anybody has concerns about that decision, the pyramid continues to go up and it's taken via the Court of Protection. And then if there's a disagreement there, then it's taken up even through the Courts of Appeal and the High Courts as well. And that's also the case if there isn't a power of attorney, it goes up through the judicial system. You know,
yeah.
say that word. But there's a next rung and a next rung. So if there's a hospital issue, then and there's no powers of attorney, no court of protection orders in place, the medical professions will make the decision. It's only when there's a disagreement that it goes up to the next rung and the next rung. Right. Same with adult social care. The same with every element of anybody's best interests, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's, as I said very early on, it's the best interests. you know, for that person, it should be person-centered care, not we have a general policy. And of course, that's the big problem. A lot of places have general policies. And the law has completely shown, hasn't it, Lisa, time and time again, you can't do that.
No.
It has to be person-specific for all sorts of things. General policy is okay, they can work in most cases, but as Lisa says, it is, like she was saying there, how do you tackle siblings who disagree? In the end, you have to move it up. As professionals in this world, like Lisa and I am, we're under a professional obligation as well to move this up, because we can't just go, you know, like, as I say, with that gentleman who we're involved with, we can't just go out, my family can't agree, we'll just walk away, because that's not professional and it's not acceptable. And Lisa, you know, all right, there are no legal requirements for what I do, but there are in my head, and I've worked in law in a way as a byproduct. But morally, that is how I feel. I can't walk away. I would have to refer it like I would if I thought any other. And I supported Annette recently with problems for one of her tenants, and once I've got all the information, I said to Annette, I have to report this to Leicestershire County Council as safeguarding issue, which I've done. And I think Leicestershire County Council were entirely thrilled that I put this on their plate. I had 3 phone calls, all asking for the same information, until I lost my rag with the 3rd phone call. I said, I have given you all the information I have, but this is the 3rd time I passed all this on. Don't call me again. Deal with it. Oh, well, we are dealing with it in the background. I said, good, because that's what you need to be doing. This is 3 days later, and you're still asking the same information as I gave you on the 1st phone call. What are you doing? You're the 3rd different person I've spoken to. Either record the conversation, write it down, but just do something. Don't just keep asking me the same stupid questions. That's slightly polite. There was another question, wasn't there?
I think just James, yeah.
Is there anyone following up behind you with this? In what terms, James? Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if my dog's snoring, it is my dog snoring. If you can hear it, it's nice. Yeah, this is really important, isn't it? I mean, it's so important that people are getting old and that we don't really know how to deal with that. Yeah, I fear that there's only so much you can do on your own. So is the case that because I don't know much about it and you do, that there are other people like you in the country that are doing a similar thing, or is it a case that you are literally having to do this all by yourself?
No, there are other similar people. I'm a member of the Care Advisors Network, which is a group of similar people to me, working in different parts of the country. I only operate in England because the law, like with many other things, is different in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. It's not hugely different, but the limits on what, you know, in Scotland, they're hugely generous, you know, in what they will pay, whereas here, you know, you're down to your last 14,250 quid. As long as you live in your house, it's ignored. As soon as your house goes, if you move it to care and it's sold, then it's going to pay for your care. But we're not desperately generous. The figures are pretty poor, and we're not really well equipped. But there are other people like me, and there are, you know, yes, there are other people supposed to should be dealing with this. Staff in the hospitals, staff in adult social care, police, you know, all various people like that, CQC who go out and carry out inspections, you know, and things like that. So there are all sorts of official people there. As I say, the gap is the self-funders, basically, that anyone's entitled to a care needs assessment by adult social care, and adult social care is it's a county function, or if you're like in Leicester, it's in the city, because that's a unitary authority in itself. But they have, I mean, funding for all local governments has been cut back hugely over the last 10 or 12 years. They are hugely overworked. I mean, COVID hasn't helped. They have caseloads longer than their arms. They are being lent on by their managers, who are being lent on by their managers and the directors and our elected representatives in local authorities to get rid of cases as quickly as possible, basically. So if you phone up, they are not supposed to ask how much money have you got until they've done a care needs assessment. But I can guarantee you within the first few minutes, they'll have quietly found out what loved one's financial situation is, and if they've decided they're self-funders, basically they're going to try and get rid of you as fast as possible and say that's not legal, but it happens, and I understand why it happens. Most of the people go into care at whatever level, nursing and that sort of thing, went in because they care, but the processes and the systems, etc., can tend to grind them down. And it's like all businesses, you get the odd bad apple, it's just really unpleasant and nasty, but I reckon 98% of the people I meet in adult social care and care homes and care professions and NHS are nice people. Some of them are just worn down by the system. So there are supposed to be all those backstops in place, basically. And of course, one of the final backstops is ourselves, because anyone, if you're worried about a neighbour, an elderly neighbour, anyone can contact adult social care and say, I'm worried that something's not right next door and don't seem to be seeing any family, and I think they're really struggling, and it's getting really messy and dirty and whatever. And you can do that. Any of us can do that. We can report if we've got safeguarding concerns about someone. And that's my it's adult social care over retirement age, but you can do that for any child, as you know. If you've got worries about a child or whatever else, you can do that. So we are also the eyes and ears out there of what's going on, frankly. And basically, that's what I've done for Annette. She's been the eyes and ears, and so I've done that reporting for her. If you like, I've done it as a member of the public, not in my business role. So there should be, but things fall through gaps, and there is quite a lot of underfunding, and COVID's made it worse, definitely. But that is gradually hopefully reopening. And then for me as well, you know, I work with people like Lisa, who are private client solicitors, still wills, lost and power of attorney, all that sort of thing, estate planning. You know, so I have to remember you're a new member, Lisa. I'm sorry, because I've talked about Lindsay, but you do all these things. You're a private client solicitor. So Lisa can do all these things. You know, if you need wills, last and powers of attorney, estate planning, all that sort of stuff, she can do all that too. You know, look at that, talk about it, and try and get things in place for yourselves and your loved ones. Because one of the things I do come across older people who don't want to have last and powers of attorney. They think it's immediately going to take all the control away. It doesn't. They don't come into effect unless you've lost capacity and can't make decisions. That is definitely true for health and wellbeing. For the finance one, you can actually bring it in sooner if you want to. If you've got to the point that you're struggling, you can't get to the bank, you can't do this, you can't do that. For my mum, my sister and I, reaction, the finance and property one earlier. My mum never actually lost capacity, although she was very ill. She was physically incapacitated, but mentally she didn't have dementia or anything like that. But because we got them, and because she would say, I want my daughters to be involved and consulted or whatever, so she'd given explicit permission, they would talk to us about various things. But a lot of older people are worried they'll lose control, and they won't. The way I put it is that it's just there as a backstop. It's like having a will in place or anything else, it's there as a backstop. What I equally say is, if you don't have them and something happens, who do you want to be making decisions about? Particularly, I mean, I say to people, if I could only have one, I'd have the health and welfare. So if they said you can have one or the other, but you can never have both, I would have health and welfare. Bugger the money. I just want to know that if I am incapacitated in any way, whether it's short term or long term, that the people who can have an input into making decisions about my well-being, treatment I get, and everything else are the people that love me and know me, i.e. my husband and my 2 daughters. Not some faceless NHS bureaucrat or court protection or whatever else who doesn't know me from Adam, and I'm just another case, another statistic, and they're just looking at the odds, basically. They don't, to be fair, they've never known me as a person. They don't know what I would want, what I would like, and what my thoughts and feelings are. So that's what I say. If I could only have one, I'd have that. The money will sort itself out eventually. It's a lot easier and cheaper if you've got LPA for finance and welfare. But the key one for me is that in my dotage or when I lose capacity, I want people who love me and care about me to be making decisions. And that's what I say to people. Is that what you want? Or do you want some faceless bureaucrat making a decision about whether you get brought back from the dead or have a treatment or are just left to die or whatever else? I mean, there are the old people who say, God, not my children, but
Oh, well, thank you, Joanne. Has anybody got anything else they wanted to add, or are we all okay? That was great. I'm going to stop the recording if I can find where that is up here.